So today we're going to talk about yoga. The yoga is espoused by the second century sage Patanjali. You can find these articulated in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and this is a path that takes us to the inner self. So one of the early introductory mantras defines yoga. It says, Yogas chitta vritti nirodha, that the practice of yoga, the purpose of the practice is to still the vrittis of the mind, to still the movements of the mind. The word vritti means movement, thought, a thought that's held in mind that creates ripples in our own consciousness. And so yoga is really the practice of stilling the mind. Why? Once the mind becomes still, then the self can be experienced directly. The analogy that Patanjali uses is that the mind is very much like a lake with waves, with ripples on the surface. And there are many, many different ripples. And so the practice of yoga brings those ripples into one ripple through practices. Then when that vritti dissolves, then the self reveals itself. So all of these 8 limbs, the purpose is to still the vrittis of the mind, to have a quiet mind, to have a peaceful mind so that we can experience the self. There are 8 of these limbs. The first 2 I'll take together. These are called the yamas and the niyamas. And these are traditional virtues and practices that we can do to quiet the mind, to live an ethical life. Now, this is not moralistic at all. These are do's and don'ts in our life that will help us to quiet the mind. It has a very practical effect. It has nothing to do with morality or judgment or sins or condemnation, anything like that. We do these particular practices and refrain from certain activities because by doing that, we'll enjoy inner peace. We won't be disturbed. For example, the first of the yamas is ahimsa, non-violence, non-harming. We harm someone, we're going to have vrittis in the mind. We're going to be afraid of having violence in our own life. If we're not living in peace and not harming anyone, we make violence a reality in our life, and we suffer from that. Um, I spent some time in Assisi, Italy, where I taught a bit about the teachings of St. Francis. St. Francis of Assisi was known, in fact, for his gentleness, his nonviolence, and his reputation spread throughout Italy. And I'll tell you a little story. There was a little village called Gubbio, and there was a wolf that lived there by a very big, ferocious wolf that was terrorizing the small village. And at night, the wolf would come in and eat the livestock, and the villagers were up in arms. They were ready to get arms and go out and kill the wolf. And one of the priests there told them about Francis and said that he had the ability, because of his peaceful inner nature and his practice of ahimsa, that he could perhaps bring some peace to this situation. So they sent for Francis, and he was in Assisi. He came to Gubbio, and they told him the story. And he said, "All right, I'll speak to the wolf. I'll be in the wolf's presence and see what we can do." So Francis went into the woods and called forth the wolf. And according to the legend, the tradition, he met with the wolf and told him that, you know, if, if you keep coming into the city and killing the livestock, the villagers are going to come and kill you. So what I would recommend is that you stop doing that. And if you'll be peaceful with the village, come into the village every day and they'll treat you like a pet. They'll feed you and take care of you. And that's exactly what happened. The wolf gave up his ways of coming and killing the livestock. And when he would enter the village, the children would come and pet him. The villagers would feed him, and there was peace. This is said to be the siddhi, the practical power that arises within us when we do this practice of ahimsa. The second of these is called satya, speaking the truth, not telling lies. If we speak the truth, we don't have to remember anything, right? If we speak falsehoods, we have to remember, we have to keep our story straight. So there's always a sense of worry in the mind. Disturbs our peace. We tell an untruth and we sacrifice the peace, sacrifice the quiet. You know, Mahatma Gandhi was noted for his practice of speaking the truth and speaking only the truth. And his reputation had spread. And there was a woman who came to meet him and brought her son with him. And she stood before Mahatma and was asking him a favor. He said, Mahatma, please tell my son to give up eating sugar. He eats sugar all the time. It's not good for him. So please tell him to give it up. Mahatma took a pause and said, come back next week. So she did. She left. She came back a week later, asked the same question, got the same response. This went on for 6 weeks. Every week she would come back and say, Mahatma, please tell my son to quit eating sugar. And on the 6th week, Mahatma Gandhi looked at her and said, son, give up sugar. Stop eating sugar. It's not good for you. And the woman, his mother, was amazed. She said, well, why did it take you 6 weeks? Why didn't you say that the first week? Why 6 weeks? And she looked at the woman and said, 6 weeks ago, I ate sugar. I ate it every day. I loved it. It took me 6 weeks before I could give up sugar myself. And I had to give up sugar myself before I could give the instruction to quit eating sugar. This is one of the siddhis, one of the powers of speaking the truth, that whatever you say comes to fruition. In fact, in the Shiva Sutras, it says, Kata Japaha, the one who's established in the truth, whatever words they utter come to fruition. The third of these yamas is called asteya, non-stealing. If we're a thief, if that's the way we make our living, aren't we always living in fear of being caught? We take something of someone. We might enjoy it for a moment, but there's always that underlying fear of being caught. Once again, it disturbs our peace. Aparigraha, non-possessiveness. This has to do with not being attached to things. When we're attached to things, we can be disturbed when something happens to them. I remember reading an article where there was a member of a biker gang who was sentenced to prison for murder, for killing someone. And they asked him why he did it. And he said, well, the fella touched my bike, my motorbike. And anybody who touches my bike touches me. Now, this is an extreme case of possessivism. He was so attached to his bike that he was willing to commit murder for it. Not that we do that, but we sacrifice our peace. We murder our peace every time we're attached to things in the world. The fifth of these is brahmacharya. This is the maintenance of our vitality. And in the practice of yoga, we learn to work with this inner energy, which can be transmuted and used for the sake of spiritual growth, instead of our sexuality being a dissipation of energy in the pursuit of pleasure. It becomes the fuel that we can use to manifest money, or to be successful in life, or to be purposed for the realization of the self. So these are the 5 yamas. The 5 niyamas are the things that we can actively do in order to create this inner peace. The first of these is tapasya. This is purification, different practices that we can do in order to create discipline. Santosha is the practice of contentment. In the Talmud, the Jewish scriptures say that a wise man is one who is content with what he has. Contentment has no relationship to how much money we have or how many possessions we have. It's an inner state that we can cultivate. And in the practice of yoga, we practice developing our contentment. Saucha. Saucha means purity, cleanliness. So a clean environment, keeping our meditation room, keeping our home clean, keeping our body clean, but more importantly, keeping our mind clean. The final words of my guru, when I'd spent 7 years living with him, he placed me in an ashram in Los Angeles. And I was heartbroken that he was leaving, and I had a sense that I wouldn't see him alive again. And his final words to me were, clean your room, clean your room. And my first thought was, gee, my mother told me the same thing when I was a kid, but this had a different meaning. It was not only cleaning the space around me, but cleaning my mind out every day, making sure that there's no resentments or upsets or residual anger. So I make it a practice every night before I go to bed and go to sleep, is to recall the day and see if there's any trash that needs to be taken out, any unresolved issues, any upsets, any grievances that I'm holding, so that I can let them go. So I clean my room every day, and this is called saucha. Swadhyaya is self-study. We used to chant sacred mantras, stotra mantras every day, focus the mind on the various scriptures, study the scriptures during the day, practice jnana yoga. So we would study, consciously study the scriptures as a practice. Ishvara Pranidhana is practicing the art of surrender. And we can surrender to a higher power. If we have a deity, we can surrender to Shiva, Krishna, or we can simply surrender to life as it is, to accept life as it is. Instead of struggling against our destiny and struggling with what's happening to us, we can develop this ability to surrender and to let go. Now, these 10 practices, these 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, these are designed to keep the mind in a quiet state so that we can realize the self. The third of these limbs is asana. Asana is the practice of sitting, performing a particular asana. And the scriptures say that this should be comfortable, easy, and we should be able to hold it for a long time. Now, in the West, asana practice is what people largely think yoga is. People do hatha yoga, and they do lots and lots of different practices. But we should remember that according to Patanjali, the purpose of yoga is to strengthen the body, to make it flexible enough and strong enough to sit undisturbed for long periods of time. So if you're comfortable sitting on the floor in the lotus or the easy posture, this is an asana practice. If you're unable to sit on the floor, sitting in a chair is perfectly comfortable. And what I would recommend is that maybe you do a few asanas in order to make your body a little more stronger and a little more flexible so that you can sit for long periods of time. There's nothing worse than being in a deep state of samadhi and all of a sudden your back is hurting, your knee is hurting. You need to rest. So we do asana practice so we can sit comfortably for a long period of time. Now, the yogis say that the subtle, the esoteric meaning of asana has nothing to do with the physical posture. It's the posture of the mind. It's the attitude that we're holding. It's the perspective. The asana is the perspective. So as we begin to meditate, we like to have the right perspective, the right mindset. We like to have the mind going in the right direction. And the right direction isn't outward. The right direction is inward to our own self. That's the purpose. Fourth stage is pranayama. There's an intimate connection between the breath and the mind. And in yoga, we can do practices to quiet the mind so that the breath becomes quiet. We can do pranayama, breath practices, in order to quiet the mind. So ultimately, the purpose of pranayama is so that we can use the breath to quiet the mind. I particularly like to use pranayama when my mind is active, when I'm ready for meditation and my mind is disturbed or it's overstimulated. Maybe I've been busy during the day or maybe even had too much coffee, something like that. I will do some pranayama in order to prepare myself for meditation. The fifth stage is called pratyahara. And this is where we leave the physical practice. So think of these first four practices as physical practices. We use the body, we use the breath. Now we're moving into the more subtle dimension. And the transition period between the what we'll call the anavopaya practices, now we move into the shaktopaya practices, which is dealing with the mind. So we close our eyes and we begin to withdraw our awareness from the outer world and turn it in. So we usually begin by closing our eyes. So we block out the exterior world, begin to turn within, and we can turn our inner senses, our sense of hearing, instead of listening to the sounds out here, you can actually listen to the sounds within you. You can listen to the sound of your breath. You can hear the movement of the blood. So we begin to tune into the inner reality as we let go. The analogy that Patanjali uses is it's like a tortoise who's walking, and the tortoise, when it practices pratyahara, pulls all of its limbs into the shell. It pulls the legs in, pulls the head in, and withdraws to its center. This is pratyahara. So then we begin the practice of meditation. And there's three stages to meditation: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. These three practices together we call samyama. So the first stage is dharana, where we begin to rein in the movement of the mind. The Bhagavad Gita says the mind is more fickle than the wind and